the guy that was interviewing him, this was 2 weeks ago, he said, well, when can we expect to see this begin? He goes, well, he said, it's probably going to get a little crowded around Christmas. And again, no doomsday, nothing here. It's just he wanted to put the warning out, because if they do pop and blow up over a city, it's going to be a sonic boom and shaking of houses, and nobody's going to know what it is. I mean, we hear about that happening all the time. This is nothing new. It's just the size of this cluster is what's important here. He says probably more toward December. He says, but we'll see some stragglers coming in around October. We should. And I'm in my truck fixing to go to bed. It was 10:30 on September the 30th, just a few weeks ago. And I was fixing to go to bed. And my sister texted me. Every time my sister texts me, man, I have to take a breath, you know. But she texted me, and a meteorite had just blew up over the west side of Nashville. It was heard in National City all the way down to Kingston Springs. And there were some guys out in their yard at a little party drinking that actually videotaped it with their cell phone coming across, and then poof. And I looked at my watch, and I'm like, man, I just heard this dude say the 1st of October we can start seeing the stragglers, and here we are an hour and a half from October, and one blows up over Nashville, man. I'm like, this is cool. And the next morning, I've got a friend of mine that lives in Panama City. He's a captain. He owns his own charter boat. If y'all ever want to go to Panama City, the Redneck Riviera, and do some deep sea fishing, look me up. I'll hook you up with. But he called me Friday morning about 10 o'clock. He's like, dude, they own a condo. Matter of fact, okay, let me just digress for a moment. They own a condo on the 20th floor, okay, 200 feet. And I've been dying. I've been begging my wife, let's stay in that condo, because I want to put my dual band vertical dipole out on that balcony at 200 feet and see what happens then. Because the year before, I took a vertical dual band that I built out of PVC and coat hangers and vice gripped it to the balcony of, well, I take that back. We couldn't put anything on the balcony, and I got chastised, and so there was a fake ficus tree in the bedroom for decoration. And it was about that tall in the pot, so I moved it out on the balcony and then hid that antenna in that ficus tree. And, buddy, I went to work. And I was checking the VF ducting. Now, we were on the 7th floor. We were only 70 feet in the air, and I was tagging repeaters in Texas and Louisiana because the ducting was all red, you know, across the Gulf. And so I was like, man, we have to stay in that 200-foot condo. And the price that they want for the condo for a rental and what we want to pay is like, we're not really in the same ballpark. So I think I can go, do away with being 200 feet in the air. But anyway, so he calls me. He's like, dude, he's like, man, this is Friday morning right after the one and a half. He's like, man, we were in the condo, man, and the whole condo shook. We just had a meteor blow up over Panama City. I was like, you sure that's what it is? Oh, yeah, man. He said it was crazy. So I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe there is something to this. Okay? Now, again, there's nothing to be concerned about. This is nothing new, but it's just the size of this one to be watching for. Cool, man. Come on, man. And so, okay, the point of telling you all this is not a doomsday deal. It is to reinforce the fact we have no idea. We have no idea where the communication breakdown is going to come. All I'm doing is tapping on the clipboard as to what's around us now that we are experiencing in a greater volume. That's all I'm doing. Okay? So back out from the group, from this Babylonian system, and start focusing on what is true. Well, but they might be bored. Y'all bored? Okay. Okay. Come on, man. All right. I need a. So, we ask ourselves, well, I'm just going to share a story that I told last year, okay, because this is an important one. There is a preacher by the name of David Gibb. Look him up, man. He is an awesome preacher. I mean, this guy, he's an attorney, and he will work with you if you've had your religious liberties violated. Awesome man. He's a preacher, educated, and the man can sell you. He can sell igloos to Eskimos in the wintertime. I mean, he's just that awesome to listen to. He was preaching at a church, and his message was that we have to be driven with a purpose. We have to be driven with a purpose. He said he was preaching at this church. It was a gospel meeting, and he was the one asked to do the gospel meeting. And he got up and he preached. He said, I felt like it was a pretty good sermon. You know, those of us that talk think, yeah, you know, we're pretty good at what we do, hopefully. He said, when I sat down, he said a young man and woman got up and they came forward and dedicated their lives to Christ. And he said the whole church just erupted in applause and standing ovations, and they were throwing their books in the air. And he said, I have been preaching for 30 years of my life, and I've never seen such excitement. So he got to think in his mind, man, these people must have been doing something really bad to, that finally turned their life around. And so after church, the preacher of the church takes David Gibb out, and they're eating dinner, and they were talking about what a great service it was. And the preacher says, David, I guess you're wondering why everyone was so elated when that young couple got up and came to the front. He's like, well, I wasn't going to say anything, but, yeah, I'm curious, man. He said, well, this young man, he has just graduated. Now, I don't know the details, but he went to medical school and got his degree in medical school. Then he went to brain surgery school to learn how to work on brains. And this guy, spent after 12 years of high school, spent another 14 to 15 years learning how to do brain surgery. He's one of 5 doctors in the world that could take a brain out of your head and rebuild it and put it back in just like a transmission. There are some things that just have to go to the junkyard, man. But he could take a brain out of a skull and rebuild it and put it back in. 5 doctors in the world that can do this, and he was one of them. He's had top medical universities, top hospitals give him a $5 million sign-on bonus to come to work for them. They were offering him Ferraris, mansions to come to work for their hospital. And he said this morning, this man and woman, they came up and dedicated their life to the ministry of God. He's going to Africa to do brain surgery on people that cannot afford to pay him a dime. You've got to be guided. You've got to know the mission at hand. And we here, and as I said last year, we have been going through 14 years of medical school. We've been learning APRS. We've been learning all of the tricks of the trade. We've been sharing ideas, experimenting with building antennas. How many of you right now, and I hate to bring Rambo up, he's my favorite. If you had nothing, if you had no wire or anything, how many of you could fabricate something to make a resonant antenna if need be? We have a gift. We have a gift. We have ancient technology that's going to be on the battlefield fighting it. we have to be driven. We've got to know the mission at hand. We've got to look away from the $5 million homes. We've got to look away from the Ferraris. We've got to step out of the crowd and listen to the tap of the clipboard. All right, Bobby, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up because I don't want to keep them hanging. But I will close with this, as I did last year. True story. Many of you may know the details. I actually know the details of this one, which is pretty cool. In 1925, in Alaska, was the worst winter that they have ever experienced prior to 1925, and even up until today. 1925 was the worst winter Alaska has ever experienced. When Alaska normally has 40 to 60 below zero temperatures, this year they had 40 to 80 below temperatures. Whenever they had, 10, 20 feet of snow, they had 40 feet of snow. On record. Actually happened. In 1925. And in 1925, there was a diphtheria outbreak that busted loose in Nome, Alaska. Nome, Alaska sits 1,000 miles from Anchorage. A diphtheria outbreak hit Nome, and they were running out of serum. Now, they had plenty of it down in Anchorage, Alaska, but they were running low on Nome, and they were severely worried. So, luckily, thank goodness, the telegraph wires were still in place. And they're up there, texted to Washington and said, we need help. People are dying and we're running out of serum. They had tried everything. That winter was so severe, their modern day technology. They had a few planes in Alaska at that time, but they couldn't fly because it was too cold. They had trains, but the snow was so thick and packed they couldn't make it through any of the passes. They had no way of getting the serum from Anchorage to Nome. They were dying. Word got to Washington, D.C. Calvin Coolidge called for a national day of prayer for Nome, Alaska. England put out an order for a national day of prayer for Nome, Alaska. Well, there was a gentleman by the name of Charlie McCoy. Charlie McCoy was one of the top dog sled runners in Alaska. And he had this idea. And he got on the telegraph wires, and he was telegraphing all of the dog sled stations in between Alaska, or Anchorage and Nome. He said, I know this is going to sound crazy, so don't tell me. He said, I know that we're probably not going to be able to do this, but don't tell me that either. If we could take the serum on a dog sled from one depot to the next and hand it off to the next team, and they take it to the next depot, hand it off to the next team, could we get it to Nome, Alaska? They said, Charlie, there ain't no way, man. You don't have any idea. He's like, look, man, the people are praying. Now, interestingly enough, these men I'm referring to, they were not very religious or spiritual, but they knew, because they had seen in their lifetime, that when you pray, things happen. And they were willing to take that chance with their ancient technology. So, Charlie McCoy, he loaded up the dog sled and off he goes. 4.5 days. This dog sled pulled into the depot 67 miles from Nome, Alaska. 4.5 days. At this juncture, it was a man by the name of Charlie Olson was running the dog sled. They had 2 of his dogs that were frozen in harness, dead. The lead dog had a broke leg and couldn't go anymore. Now, I don't know anything about dog sledding, okay? But what I do know is if you don't have a lead dog on point, you don't have a dog sled. You could have all the dogs in the world pulling it, but if you don't have that lead dog that's been trained on point, you don't have a dog sled. I mean, it's kind of like getting on the air without a 7300, right? Well, we get the idea. You might be squeaking, but you ain't doing it on the 7300, are you? So, 4.5 days, they made it 67 miles from Nome, Alaska. Charlie Olson pulls in. The man that was going to take the reins with his sled was a man by the name of Gunnar Kasem. Gunnar Kasem was one of the top dog sled runners of his day. And Gunnar Kasem comes out, sees the dog sled, 2 dogs frozen in harness. We still good? 2 dogs frozen in harness. Lead dog with a broke leg. Charlie Olson came in and said, Gunnar, it's over. It's over. And Gunnar said, it ain't over. He said, go get the dogs, strap them up. He's like, the lead dog here, Gunnar, he's got a broke leg. We don't have a lead dog. Hook up the dogs. He said, I've got one dog I've been training. His name is Balto. He's like, Gunnar, Balto on a dry day in the summer couldn't pull a dog sled, and you cannot put that. He's like, go get Balto. He said, they're dying. People are praying. In the process of hooking up this dog sled, one of the worst storms in this year hit Alaska. They were having 60 to 70 mile an hour straight line winds that had actual ice balls in this storm. Baseballs coming at you 60, 70 miles an hour. Snow, thunder, you can just imagine. Gunnar strapped them all up. He got ready to go. Charlie's like, look, Gunnar, you ain't going to make it. Gunnar looked back at Charlie Olson. He said, Balto, hup, hup. And off they ride. They rode just a little ways until they were out of sight and out of sound. The last thing that Charlie Olson then goes into the cabin to warm up. And the last thing that was written, or the 2 things that they found written in Charlie Olson's journal was, that was the bravest man that I had ever known. And I will never see my friend again. Next morning, Gunnar Kasem pulls in the last depot outside of Nome, Alaska. I don't know what the deal was. I don't know if the message didn't get to this last depot, but when he arrived, everybody was still asleep. There was no dogs up, harnessed, ready to go. And I don't know anything about how to do that either. But what I do know is you have to condition the animal to the temperatures. It's not, you don't just yank them out of bed and strap them to the sled and ride. And so, with that being stated, Gunnar Kasem knew there was no way, there wasn't enough time to get the dogs up. Balto, hup, hup. Gunnar Kasem made it to Nome, Alaska. He had turned the sled over 3 different times, had spilt the serum 3 different times. He had 2 broken ribs on one side of his rib cage and 3 on the other. They said that he was so frozen that he couldn't even blink his eyes. They had to literally peel him off of the sled. And the only thing he said was, did I make it? Word got out to D.C. They flew Gunnar and they flew Balto out to D.C. They had a big parade. They made a statue of Balto, and it's sitting in Central Park to this day to honor what Balto did. So they came out, the reporters did, and started talking with Gunner. And Gunner just told them, he said the people were dying and people were praying. And they were like, well, we need to start giving you all these awards. And he said, give it to the dog. He's the one that deserves it. I was just along for the ride. And as he was getting on the plane, they asked him, what possessed you to take an untrained dog like this in such extreme temperatures and put him out on point to pull this sled? And y'all listen close. Before you can put Balto out there, you got to have Balto in here. True story. To this day, in Alaska, once a year, they run a race called the Iditarod. And this Iditarod race, they retrace the exact path that these brave men went. So before we can put Balto out there in the world, we got to have Balto in here. Before we can get up and walk through that door in front of all these people, knowing the truth, we got to have it in here. We cannot be distracted by storms, ice, snow, blinding winds, music played on the radio, laughing at us, burping on the radio. Ignore it. Yeah, Mr. Echo. Well, that might be me. I might have grabbed the wrong mic. But if we're letting these little things like Facebook deleting our post and laughing and burping on the airwaves discourage us, friends, we're not even going to put the sled in the wind, much less make it to Nome. We have no idea the storms that we're going to be traveling through from this day. None. I don't. I mean, I have ideas that I could tell you that you wouldn't be able to sleep tonight, but I don't know if it's true or not. The point is that the storms are coming, and we cannot get discouraged because our dog is not completely trained. We can't get discouraged because of worrying about what's going to happen to us, folks. But the point is, we have the knowledge to run that sled, and we know how to do it. Nome, Alaska was dying. They had the utmost latest technology. They had airplanes and they had trains, and it did them nothing. It was the ancient technology that saved Nome, Alaska. It's going to be the ancient technology. We are going to, folks, I don't think you understand this. I don't think you grasp the concept because it's even hard for me. But I'm just about done. But trust me, just watch. Just watch. Communications. I don't know how. I don't know if it's going to be from a solar event or an EMP or I don't know. It could be a solar flare from the sun for all I know. Knock out our grid. I don't know. They may just take the spigot and turn our grid off like they're doing the freighters, folks. I'm telling you, it's coming, and we have the technology, the ancient technology. Folks, I appreciate your time and being so polite. Bobby, thank you for letting me speak.
Oh, you man.